Every once in a while, the Babylon Bee is funny. But for the most part, the Babylon Bee functions as an aid and adjunct to support for the far right MAGA movement. And that's not funny. And I want to give you the perfect example of that in this video. Well, the case of Kilmar Garcia has occupied public attention for weeks now. This is a man who was a resident legally present in the United States, and Trump sent him to an El Salvador prison, claiming that he is a member of the gang MS-13, but without allowing him to have the legal process to which he is entitled to have a hearing in the United States to make a determination. So we're supposed to just take Trump's word for it. And Trump's been fighting a public relations battle on this very issue. And it's not just about the rights of one person, it's about the rights of all people. Because if Trump can summarily take one individual and deport them, render them to a foreign prison just on Trump's say so as to what they've allegedly done, he can ostensibly do that for everyone or anyone. And in fact, Trump himself has been saying in the last few weeks he now wants to start doing this to American citizens, people who are citizens of the United States, be able to take them off the street, put them in a prison, send them off to a foreign prison without a trial or a hearing. That is an absolutely chilling reality. So Trump is himself fighting the public relations battle on that issue. And he did that on April 21st when he posted this on social media. He said, "This is the man, Kilmar Garcia, that the courts are trying to save from being deported. He was supposed to be, according to the judge and the Democrats, a wonderful father from Maryland." But then they noticed he had MS-13 tattooed onto his knuckles and a lot of really bad stories about his past. This is the gang that is perhaps the worst of them all. What is wrong with our country? Okay, the first thing to note here about this statement is the issue is not whether he's a wonderful man or not. The issue is that he has not had any process to determine whether he has links with MS-13 or not. And taking Trump's word for it is not adequate, right? You actually have to have a legal process. He has a right to a judicial proceeding on that very question. But note that he says here that Garcia has MS-13 tattooed onto his knuckles. What is he talking about? Well, he's holding up a picture. And if we take a closer look at that picture, here's what we see. Uh, Now, it's pretty clear, I mean, it's manifestly clear to anybody looking at this picture that what you have on his knuckles are four tattoos. One, or not on the knuckle, but on the upper part of the finger, like a marijuana leaf, smiling face, a cross, and a skull. And that what has happened is the image that is posted on there, it has superimposed or added MS-13. In other words, whoever added the MS-1 and 3 is trying to give an interpretation of the meaning of the symbols. Now, I was reading from two gang experts online talking about MS-13, saying this is not the marijuana sign, the smiley face, the cross, and the skull are not symbols for MS-13. It just is not true. But the bigger issue here is that the M, the S, the 1, and the 3 are clearly superimposed onto the photo. And yet we saw that Trump here says that he has MS-13 tattooed onto his knuckles. So it raises an interesting question. Does Trump actually think that the M, the S, the 1, and the 3 are tattoos? They're part of the photo. Does he not realize that they were photoshopped or that they were added later? And that's what came out in rather stark and embarrassing fashion just a few days ago with an interview with ABC News. So let's take a look at that clip.
These tattoos. Oh, he had some tattoos that are interpreted that way. But let's move on.
Wait a minute. Hey, Terry.
He did not have the letter MS-13.
It says MS-13.
Yeah, that was photoshopped. So let me
That was photoshopped, Terry. You can't do that. Hey, they're giving you the big break of a lifetime. You know, you're doing the interview. I picked you because, frankly, I never heard of you, but that's okay. But I picked you, Terry. But you're not being very nice.
Okay. See, that's an excerpt from the exchange. It does go on at more length. Let's debrief that. So as they're talking, Trump says how the Abrego Garcia had MS-13 tattooed onto his knuckles. And I think you can see this reporter, uh, I don't know him, his name Terry, I guess. He kind of takes a step back and he's looks like he's surprised, beginning to realize that when Trump posted that originally, that image, he actually did believe that what was clearly superimposed lettering onto the image to interpret what the tattoos allegedly meant, that Trump actually thought that was tattooed onto the man's knuckles. And it's interesting because you'd think that a reporter would want to dig into that and say, you think that that is real. But there's this sense of recoil and almost embarrassment, it appears, on behalf of the reporter who wants to move on to another topic and just kind of offhandedly said, well, that was Photoshop. Let's move on. And Trump digs in. Terry, right? Trump is incredulous that this reporter would uh, deny what to Trump seems obvious, that he actually did have MS-13 tattooed onto his knuckles. So the lesson here is that there's a difference between misinformation and disinformation. Misinformation is the propagation of bad or false information. Disinformation is the intentional propagation of false or bad information. Misinformation isn't lying. Disinformation is lying. And the interesting thing in this moment is this little slice of information about the image with the tattoo, you realize that clearly, well, probably some of Trump's handlers, they're propagating disinformation. That when they gave him the image and he held it up and they took a photo and they posted it on Twitter or X or Truth Social, wherever that was, that Trump thought that was real. So for him, it's misinformation because he's so befuddled, he's so confused. Now, there's an interesting question there about Trump's own cognitive ability. This goes back to the dementia tests he's taken in the past, and you're wondering, one of the big issues here is how much does he even understand is going on around him if he thinks that the MS-13 was actually tattooed onto the man's knuckles? And that's really where the big issue should be in this brief exchange with this reporter on this topic, is how could Trump be so not tracking with reality that he thought that was real and that he is spreading inadvertently misinformation, which is probably disinformation from his handlers, but through his hands, it becomes misinformation because he's just so confused and he thinks it is actually true. And that's pretty significant because here's a man with the nuclear codes who is so confused about basic facts and information. You'd want to dig in on that. So then, if you have what is ostensibly a satire site like the Babylon Bee, you'd think they would hone in on that and they would want to highlight that Trump here, I mean, this is the man who boasted about passing a dementia test in this embarrassing exchange in his first term with Chris Wallace, where he bragged about being able to recall that he had seen a TV and a man and a tree or whatever it was. Right? And he remember that he relayed the five objects he had seen and passed the dementia test as if that is something to boast about. And you want to, as a satire website, you'd want to highlight that and say, this is significant and concerning that this man shows lots, clear signs of cognitive decline and someone who is incredibly fatuous, ignorant, foolish, that they would believe this is legitimate image. That's not how the Babylon Bee handles this. So let's take a look. So this is how the Babylon Bee handles that embarrassing exchange with the ABC reporter. They say, media says no evidence, demon-horned man with Sith tattoos and red lightsaber, a member of the Sith. And that's the story that they want to go with. So that's their satirization. Now, the problem here, of course, is that this flips the script. In reality, it is Trump who is utterly foolish, who thought what was obviously photoshopped or altered image with the MS-13 added to the image to interpret that tattoos. He falsely, naively assumed that, in fact, those were stamped onto the knuckles. And that's what you would ostensibly be satirizing. But in fact, the Babylon Bee flips on it and says, no, the analogy is with a man who clearly is a member of the Sith. The image has not been altered, and it is the reporter who is questioning the obvious reality, not Trump, who is naive and ignorant and foolish. And this is a great example of how the Babylon Bee completely flips the story. And um, now, Babylon Bee tweets have varying levels of engagement, but 17,000 likes for this one is pretty significant. So there are a lot of people who affirm this, who find this to be a humorous takedown of the media, when in fact this media person, this reporter, was not doing anything except ostensibly fumbling onto the fact that Trump himself has an obvious delusion in believing the photo was genuine. This is a perfect example of how the Babylon Bee propagates propaganda to support the MAGA far right movement.